Hi, I want to talk to you about an announcement that I made last week concerning a new company and a new product. And some of it would be self-explanatory, but clearly a press release isn't enough to give you a full picture about what I've been up to the last several months, I have to say. So I want to introduce what I'll call Requirements QA Limited, which is a company established to build a product called Requirements QA, or ReqQA, R-E-Q-Q-A, with a website reqqa.ai. Now what I want to do is just describe some background to the problems with requirements and why I've built this product. I want to talk about why I think a full requirement includes examples, and in many respects Gherkin stories are a very good way of illustrating how a requirement and a feature would behave in reality, in use. So we're not just building a product. The whole idea is to have a process which is different from what you might call waterfall or agile or continuous delivery, because we're using AI to build the product. And so we're kind of dogfooding the product. The requirements for the product are now going through the product, and we're building directly using AI, and I'm using Claude Code in particular. But in order to do this, we need a flow of information between the requirements tool and the development environment, Claude Code. And we need mechanisms for tracking change and mechanisms for dealing with feedback from the build process. So ReqQA isn't just a tool for managing requirements and doing some other clever stuff with AI. It's a way of building software. So I need to describe what it looks like, and I'll show you some example pages. I'm not going to do a demo or anything like that. I just want to give you a sense of what it can do. And really talk about, well, does it actually work? I mean, are we making progress with this? So I've got lots of metrics now, which I'm really pleased to say have come out of the build process, but also out of the tool itself. I want to close with saying, well, do you want to get involved with this? I mean, it's an ambitious project which I can't build on my own anymore, and it's been self-funded to date. So that hence getting a company off the ground to commit to building it and commercializing it and making it into a business. So enough of that. I want to talk very briefly about the problem with requirements. I mean, everybody who's worked in software for more than 10 minutes realizes that we have a difficulty with requirements, and always have. It's not changed with the varying approaches, methodologies, conventions, tools as well. And when I got involved with software, which was in the late 80s, requirements were a problem then, they're a problem now. So in 1995, my first, if you like, engagement with conferences was to talk about a different way of looking at requirements, and I had this notion of a unified approach to software testing, to systems testing. And I'm not saying it was very ambitious at the time, but it was the seed of an idea. A year later, I talked about testing requirements, because testing requirements, we need examples to do that. And to walk through, if you like, an example is really helpful to understand what a requirement actually means. So 30 years ago, I was into this in theory, and in 2011, 15 years ago, I suppose, I devised a method called DefSpan for testing or checking, validating, verifying, use any of those terms, Gherkin stories. Now from that, I worked on building a product then, but that was probably less said the better. It didn't really go anywhere. But the idea stuck with me, and over the course of some time, I've been playing around with AI to better understand whether it can write code for us. So if you like, 2025, I started writing what I called DefSpan at the time, but it quickly became apparent that it was a broader, a more ambitious tool than just testing Gherkin stories, requirements as well. And then it became clearly, we need to manage requirements and stories, so it became a requirements management tool in effect. At any rate, I've been on this case for some time now, and I just want to sort of show you the receipts of the papers I actually did write back in the day. So it is kind of the oldest unsolved problem, I would say, in software. And poor requirements have always got in our way. From the development point of view, requirements are never detailed enough, they're never clear enough, they're never unambiguous, never complete, they have contradictions and all sorts of things going wrong with them. Now, whose fault is that? Well, you can't blame the analysts, because an analyst who writes requirements, they do a fantastic job of just getting these requirements captured in the first place. But most users don't really know at a deep level and at a systematic, at a precise level, what they want, because they are not professional software and systems designers. Yeah, so they know what they've seen in other software products, and they rely a lot on their own experience of other products in effect. But at the end of the day, we have this communications problem, we have this knowledge problem, capability problem from the perspective of the user. And there's natural language is not necessarily the best way to capture requirements anyway, because natural language is not a mathematically perfect, logical, complete, uncontroversial kind of way of capturing requirements. So the problem is a human one as much as a technical one. The challenge we've got is the intent from the perspective of the user of a system, and what gets delivered is rarely a smooth path. The requirements are often blamed, and so we have to compensate for that in various ways. And over the years, we've had mechanisms for performing rework in waterfall projects, because we tend to go on the assumption that the requirements are perfect, and then we build a perfect design, and then we write code, and lo and behold, when we get into testing and the users get exposed to the software, they see all sorts of problems in what's been built. Not because anyone has done anything terribly wrong, other than the understanding of what the requirement was in the first instance was never good enough. Now, the methods we've used, Agile came along, and it's really about faster iterative learning, I would say, as opposed to development, in order to capture all the nuances of what is actually required as soon as the user gets that insight. So as soon as some software is exposed to the users, we capture their thoughts and we iterate on that basis. So Agile helps, but doesn't solve the problem. It compensates for the issues we've got with requirements. Even just introducing users and developers and testers and business analysts, getting them to talk to each other regularly, that's the biggest single step forward we can make with regards to requirements. But industrial strength methodologies have kind of failed us. They do work, but they are expensive, and they take time, and they take an awful lot of attention and discipline to use. And I don't think humans are that good at those things. And at the end of the day, the requirements themselves are never kind of verified independently. So the users do their best to review documentation, but a 100-page, a 500-page requirements document is a mighty difficult thing to review with confidence, and with the systematic approach, it's incredibly time-consuming, and users don't have that time. So we need to think about things in a different way. Now, I want to suggest, and this is what I suggested 30 years ago, although Gherkin didn't exist then. I used a different way of framing examples, which wasn't very good, but neither here nor there. I think you need requirements which set out the context of that requirement, why it is required, what that requirement is, the features, the functionality, the business rules, the validation rules, the purposes, and all this other good stuff, all this peripheral information that helps you understand the why as well as the what. Now, the requirement will set out what the system ought to do, but it does it in a kind of abstract way. An example is always helpful. So users very often want to see examples of a requirement in use, in effect, let's say. And so it's always been helpful to have examples to illustrate a feature that's been defined in a requirement, a feature in use. So I think you need both Gherkin stories or examples in some format, as well as the requirements themselves. You need the rules that requirements set out, and you need examples of those rules in use. And that's this relationship between requirements and Gherkin stories. Now, waterfall would typically generate, mountainous requirements, and agile tends to focus much more on the stories of the examples. And the requirements kind of emerge from working with stories. But you need both for a full description of what a feature should do. So I really do think that if you have both, you're in a much better place. But when you look at it at face value, you might say, well, wait a minute, that's twice as much work. And potentially it is. But then requirements are never good enough. So maybe we've been looking down the wrong end of the telescope in where the problem with our systems are. It's no longer the coding problem, the programming problem, the software problem. The problem now has shifted from building software to defining requirements that can exploit the tools we now have, AI-oriented and based technologies, to generate code. Now, not everybody is in a position where they are comfortable generating code from requirements. They might be happy with for a fun project or a toy project, but real systems require all the hard work, sweat, blood, tears that developers expend to get things built. Now, because we're in a position where we're in transition and AI is on everyone's radar now, everyone's certainly having a play with it, experimenting with it, maybe doing some interesting things with it, maybe exploiting it to actually build things and to do processes that humans are not very good at or don't like doing, or we're actually exploiting it to build software from specifications. The frontier model makers now they suggest, and there's no reason to doubt them, I think, that 60, 70, 80% of the code in their products is AI written. Now, my guess is, we don't see these things, but my guess is they're using a better requirements process than the average company, but they're exploiting the capabilities of AI to generate code incredibly quickly compared with humans. Now, I think, is the coding problem a solved problem? I'm not sure that's quite true yet, but I've no doubt it will become a solved problem. AI software development will be the future. So what are we going to do with these 25 million developers that we have around the world? Well, I think we have to encourage them to look upstream to requirements and also downstream, but also upstream to testing as well. I don't think testing is anywhere near a solved problem yet by AI or by any tool that is on the market right now. However, some of the mechanics of testing can be automated, we know that, and AI can create that automation. So the whole shape of software development is going to change. The emphasis will be much less on having people writing code to people writing better requirements definition, better acceptance criteria, better acceptance tests. The tools, and the AI in particular, can focus on building code and building developer level testing with guidance, let's say. So anyway, with all that said, the problem of requirements, I think, that was not a nutshell. That's quite an exposition, I think, now. But the problem with requirements has not gone away. It's exacerbated by AI, if we use AI to write code, because AI typically, unless you craft your prompts, to be simplistic about it, if you craft your prompts to question requirements before they commit to writing code, you might get some feedback. But very often requirements have so much ambiguity that the tools, the AI development tools, will simply make assumptions and build stuff regardless without consulting anyone outside, the user or the analyst who's trying to control the process. Now, you might call that hallucination. I think it's a bit more subtle than that. It's not that they're making things up. They have a challenge to build the software and they have to make assumptions, and those assumptions can be good or terrible. And because we don't get that feedback, we don't learn about it. So code can be written much faster, but code with lots of built-in assumptions that can really derail the end product is very easy to do now. So we've built a faster way to have more problems with our user community. So, can AI write code? Now, I'm going to do this really quick, but a few months ago in February, I had a bit of an epiphany. And when the first AI tools, and ChatGPT in particular, which got all the headlines, when that came out in November 2022, I had a play with it. I thought, can it write code? And I wasn't very impressed. And the same thing happened for about 3 years until February this year, where I had a bit of an epiphany. And if you really want to see my video of me explaining that, the QR code will take you to my YouTube channel. But basically, I decided that Claude Code writes better code than I do, and it writes it much faster. And I thought, why am I writing code anymore? You know, it's clearly better than me. And why would I resist that? It's only going to become more obvious over time. And I thought, you know what? I've got better things to do with my time than write code. Much as I love writing code, I think I have to park that skill and leave it behind. Now that opens all sorts of other considerations, like, well, wait a minute, if I don't write code, how will I have the skills to observe and to mentor or coach or assure code that's written by tools? That's a big question, but we haven't worked that out yet. I think we're on that journey though. So anyway, so I had the epiphany. I decided I'd not write code myself anymore. By then I'd made a start on writing what became the ReqQA tool, and I probably had, I don't know, 10 or 15,000 lines of code in the repository. But since February, I have not touched code in order to edit it. I read it quite often, but I am not writing it anymore at all. Claude does it all, and it does it by requirements and by specification. Now, since March 2026, ReqQA itself holds the requirements that Claude Code uses to build ReqQA features. So we're kind of dogfooding the process. You know, it's a bit circular. The tool is building itself. Not really, but you know what I mean. So we're using ReqQA to capture the intent and the ideas for requirements, and using ReqQA to improve those requirements and then spurt them out into a release scope, a build plan, if you like, and then handing that off to Claude Code, which is supervised, and I pair with Claude Code to build the software. I'm not using agents. I've not got 50 agents all crashing away using up tokens like there's no tomorrow. It's a much more personal involvement. Now that may or may not be the future, but right now that's where I'm at. I think when Claude Code becomes much smarter, and the other, obviously I've not mentioned the other products, but they're all advancing incredibly quickly, they are going to get to the point where there's really no point in confirming everything these tools do again and again and again. At any rate, there's no swarm of agents. It's me and the tool. It's a pair programming process, I would suggest. It writes code. It designs the code. I review its ideas. I review the code from time to time, but there's rather too much of it to stay on top of that. Now, is that a gap? Maybe, but then there are tools that can do better code reviews than I can. So I'm looking towards that direction of static analysis. At any rate, it's a cheaper way of building a product, and the proof is in the pudding, you could say, so I focus on outcomes rather than the way things are built. It's a development process. Now, I'm not going to dwell on this except to say, be aware, there is one. Part of it is the way the tool works, and it's got various mechanisms that allow you to flow from defining a mission statement for your app, through to requirements, which might be in a hierarchy, through to gherkin stories, which are generated typically, but you can create everything by hand. There's no reason you can't do that. But AI is used to both generate requirements artifacts as well as verify them. Okay, so the process carries on through to the build agent. Now the build agent, in this case, I am using Claude Code and myself. We are a team of two, let's say. It could be a team of people. It could be a swarm of agents. I almost don't care what that is, because the handover document specifies exactly what you want that agent, human or otherwise, it specifies what that agent must do. And it's much more prescriptive, and you could almost say contractual. And the more detail and the more constraints you build into the definitions and the guardrails, I think the better AI performs. It does less hallucination. It's got a much clearer mission to work on. My hunch, let's call it no more than that, is that that's a more effective and efficient way of building software than using people to put requirements together. Now that's a big statement. The human is still in the loop with the requirements, but if you have to hand over, say, a 100-page requirements document to your users and say, please review this in the next 7 days, what do you expect to get back? Humans are simply, they haven't got the time for a start, but they haven't got the bandwidth typically, but they haven't got the mental capacity, and it's not an intelligence thing. It's like, it's a vast amount of information that has to be cross-checked, indexed, scanned, sliced, diced. These are things that tools, and AI in particular, I think can do better than humans, and certainly faster. So I'm not saying at all that the users are not involved in the review of requirements, except that most of the legwork will be done by tools, I think, in the future. Let's leave that there. There are 3 styles of working, I think, with AI. I'm choosing the one in the middle, this human-AI pairing. Now, that's a personal preference because I'm not yet prepared to let go of complete control, let's call it. I think in the future I may step back and let the tools do everything. But in a way, I'm seeing myself as pioneering this pairing approach, pioneering for myself, because it gives me a better insight of what the AI is up to. Now, the time will come when the value of that may be more limited, because we can get AI to do whatever we want in the build process, because we can get it to capture all sorts of metrics that humans would never have the time or the inclination to do. We can get all the data required to do assurance, I believe, but we just have to specify it. So the way that we assure the work that's done by AI, which is a big deal for corporates nowadays, will be specified in the requirement that goes into that process. So requirements don't just, the scope is not just the features and the functionality and examples. It's also the way that they approach the software development problem. We can specify that. Now, one of the things that I've made some progress on, but not yet done the build side of it, is that ReqQA can, for example, specify, I think it's 36 statically detectable kind of risks, including usability, security, code quality, so on and so forth, with tools. So you can actually specify a huge amount of static testing done by technology, not by humans, as part of the handover document with the requirement, and say, development, build agent, do this as the way you work and give us the data back. We want to see all the output from these scans. And so what the mechanism will be in the future, I think, I'm believing it is, that we specify what statically detectable risks we want addressed with technology. That goes with the requirement. It becomes contractual, let's say. The build agent will have access to an API to feed back all the output from those activities. Also their development testing, also what other testing and integration activities, but also their feedback on the quality of requirements, because developers find bugs in requirements all the time. So I think the relationship will be much more automated in terms of the synchronization between what goes on in a build agent world to the analysis and the business, the client, if you like, world. At any rate, let's move on. I've got some numbers about the cost of all this stuff. Token cost, historically, the last year or two has not been very relevant, but it's now emerging as a real concern about the use of tokens. You know, some people have reported using $80,000 worth of tokens in a day. Absolutely crazy. How does that happen? Well, I believe that's because of the notion of committing everything to agents and letting the agents figure it out. And my guess is they are negotiating dramatically, they are hunting for solutions, and they're trying stuff and it's being rejected all along. I don't think anybody's got a good explanation of how agents use tokens to arrive at value, let's call it that. I really haven't seen much evidence of that, and I really would like to see the metrics and how much of the work these agents do is churn and how much of it is actually the valuable end product. We'll see. I'm hopeful it's all possible, but we haven't reached that point. So my hunch is the reason that token usage can be extremely high, you know, in the hundreds, thousands of dollars a day, is because of this agentic approach. I don't think it's easy to put together a team of agents. It's really hard to understand what they do once they're in place because the quantity of information they generate is vast. So what does ReqQA look like? I'm just going to show you some screenshots. I'm not going to explain the functionality in any great detail at all, but essentially there's this is the home page. It's a dashboard. You can see that it's split into various sections. There's the mission, which is the application itself has a mission, and it's basically a high-level statement of intent. Okay, who the stakeholders are, what they want, why they want it, you know, the business goals, all that kind of stuff. Acceptance criteria, usual kind of things. You would recognize everything that's in the mission. However, my strong suggestion is the mission should be quite detailed, because with a strong mission, you can generate a lot of the requirements very quickly. And there's no need, as in the past, to slave over trying to create, you know, 2 or 3 requirements a week, you know, through workshops and all this kind of game, because I honestly believe that if you specify the mission adequately, the generator requirements will give you, at an abstract level, all the knowledge required to build that product. Now, that's my proposal. I believe I'm doing that right now with the not just ReqQA, but some little, you might say, toy systems I'm building. They're little experiments. That's my belief. So it starts with the mission. Then we have the requirements. The requirements themselves can be in a hierarchy. So there's a notion of inheritance through the hierarchy. You know, a requirement inherits the definition in its parent. So we can take advantage. It's kind of object-oriented, but I would not say that really. I shouldn't say that. But there's an inheritance aspect to this. For each requirement that has that will generate features, the tool can generate Gherkin stories, or you can handcraft Gherkin stories yourself. But I think because large language models are good at dealing with large amounts of language, I honestly think that the generation of stories can be handed off to tools. Now, do those stories reflect what a very good system tester would create in terms of tests? I'm not sure yet, but the tester has the capability to add whatever level of enhanced examples, scenarios, to stories. They can do that. So there's no limit there. There's no limitation there. Part of the analysis process of the requirements and the stories, and the mission, they all have analysis tools. The requirements, there are 11 analyses. One of them is definitions. So it picks out terms of interest and identifies those as warranting a definition in a glossary of terms. So there's a glossary built up partly in the background, but it's all under the control of the users. Everything has to be approved by users in terms of accepting terms into the glossary and the definitions themselves. But the glossary becomes a really powerful tool to ensure that every requirement uses that glossary and those definitions in its own description of features. So glossary of terms have always been a bugbear as far as I'm concerned. The number of times you walk into projects and there is no glossary and you're using language in meetings that everybody has a different perspective on. It's a real cause of misunderstandings. There's a notion of releases, application releases. The bottom left, it's not quite squeezed on the page, but this defines a scope for a release. So you allocate stories and requirements to a release to hand off to your build agent, whatever that build agent is. Here's an example of a mission statement, and this is the ReqQA mission statement, which is universal throughout the whole set of requirements and stories for ReqQA. Not much more to say. Here's an example of a requirement. This is, where are we? FR23. This was built last week, and it's it's the RAG feature, but it's also in conjunction with another requirement. It's a whole set of requirements to do with optimization of token usage. And right now, I think it costs me about $1 a day to do the analyses of a requirement, and we usually have 6 analyses and we run them twice in 2 iterations. It's about $1 for all that. I think that will drop to about 30 cents when these features are used. Now, they're not quite implemented yet, but this is what I'm working on right now. This is the analysis page, so you can select the types of analysis and you can see definitions is there, goals and users, rules, quality attributes if they're defined. Looks ambiguity and missing, and then there are other analyses specific to requirements that define features. So these things apply to both non-functional technical requirements as well as functional requirements, and so on. So there's a whole subsystem to deal with the issues found, and every issue gets its own card, and it can be a bit overwhelming if you get thousands of issues in your requirements. However, they can be managed, using a traditional, let's say, bug tracking process, we'll call it that. But also there's an AI process called the scheduler, the synthesizer, which can look at the issues for a requirement and group them together such that one change would effect a fix for multiple issues. And that's quite common, because you could say that the analyses crank out more issues than a human would do, because a human would recognise that there's multiple things wrong with this sentence, it just needs replacing or adjusting. But there is a subsystem to manage issues and to reduce the number of issues, certainly the critical ones. You want to do this up front. That helps an awful lot. The stories is an example of stories. So this is syntax checked, but it's generated. But users can create these. Doesn't have to be done by the tool. Well, does it actually work? Well, of course it does. What I want to suggest is that because the requirements now undergo such scrutiny in ReqQA, there's all sorts of data can be obtained from that process, those processes, but also the handover document itself. There's an awful lot of, we can quantify the requirements, let's say, I don't want to go into too much detail, that are handed over to the build process. And the way I've got my build process working, which is how I'd recommend anyone who uses AI to write code does that, I've got a whole series of skills to initiate a new phase, to do all my Git repository administration, to create help content in parallel, to count the number of lines of code that have been generated and all the lines of all sorts of different kinds of code to get those statistics, to log the bugs, to analyze the bugs and to fix the bugs that it finds in its developer testing, and so on and so forth. So the nice thing about using tools to do work like that is if you build in the metrics capture at the time you build these tools, you never even notice it happening. You just get this wealth of data. Now, I'm going to argue over the course of the next few months that I've got several opportunities to write papers to describe the process and how it works and our experience. For example, I mean, this is the repository growth over time. There's about a 3-week period towards the right where I didn't write any code. I stepped back and I went to America for 10 days, and so on and so forth. So I've got data like the growth of the repository by release phase, by the phase of work. I know exactly how many tokens are used and the various analyses of every requirement, and the number of bugs, issues found, and so on and so forth, and the category of issue as well. Token usage in a more aggregate way. I can look at it for particular requirements, but also throughout the life history of the whole product. There is a process. The whole build process has more stages than this. This is a simplified kind of image of it, but the skills are critical in terms of what the build process does. It's the skills that capture most of the metrics that are of interest to us. There's also a dark factory build protocol. So ReqQA can assume that the downstream build factory is a dark factory. That is, it's unattended, it's a swarm of agents doing their thing, but interacting with the owning ReqQA process through an API to deliver what I would say is all the data required to assure those processes. And I think that's how it's going to be. No human is going to have the time or the energy or just the willpower to pay attention to things that are moving at such a rate of change. So we have to automate that and make our judgments based on captured metrics, not necessarily on witnessing processes in action. So watch out for papers. I've got loads of content now, which I'm really pleased about. I've got so much to create. I want to suggest that I've got data on the costs of doing these analyses, of which there are 11 for requirements, 7 for stories. And essentially, like a good business analyst, I think, could crank out 10 verified requirements a day at their peak, let's say. Now, what is a requirement? I mean, how long is it? What's the scale of it? How complex? Of course, this is a very simple mistake to think that all requirements are the same. Of course, they're not. But in my experience with my product, which I can show the data for, I think it's about $3.50 cost per day per requirement. If they do multiple requirements, they can, which they can, but you have to do you have to take the feedback from the issues and analyze that and fix those issues in the content itself. So I'm thinking three requirements a day might be the level of productivity from 3 to 10. Okay. One of the things that I think sells ReqQA more than anything else is this notion of hallucinations in the AI when it's building. Now, hallucinations are not unique to AI. Humans hallucinate too. Developers make assumptions which are unsafe, and they maybe not check back with the subject matter experts to find out what the real definition of a threshold or a rule ought to be. So, setting that aside, when you create a requirement spec, every requirement has perhaps 10 to 20 items of information that could be assumed, and if not explicitly defined, will be assumed by your downstream build agent. So what ReqQA does is it identifies those, and it marks them as placeholders and makes a suggestion what should go in that piece of text, But you can scan the requirements for these placeholders and fix them. Share them with your stakeholders, let them decide, and they can pick the bones out of it. Now that process, of human review of the requirements issues themselves, I think is faster and more reliable than humans doing those inspections. Because in effect, these are very detailed inspections where the requirements themselves are looked at from 11 different dimensions. So it's like 11 inspections if you choose to implement all 11. Now, what's the alternative? A human struggling to do a good job of any of those inspections. So the nature of the relationship between a software project and its end users, I think it'll have to change a little bit. I think we'll take very great care to get the business's mission just so, use that to either generate requirements or to act as the basis of the requirements created by business analysts working in the traditional way. ReqQA doesn't care, it can do generation or it can not. But then the verification of those things, I think, will be of great value. My belief, and I think I've got the data to support this, is that a human-generated requirement will have far more issues raised, inconsistencies, gaps, misuse of language, incompleteness, contradictions, ... all that other terrible stuff. I think AI can be trusted to the degree it will create better specs from a mission. Now that's an assertion that needs evidence and I need to demonstrate that, but I think I'm collecting that now. So, better specs, fewer hallucinations. Better guardrails, fewer hallucinations. Better guardrails, and I'm using templates to set the guardrail on what should be in requirements, and you can choose what templates you use, and you can create your own templates, of course. But I'm using, as a matter of course, ISO 29148. I may have got that code wrong. It'll appear a bit later on another slide, but it's a standard for software engineering requirements documents. It's a very, very well-known, widely used standard. People using standards is not always helpful because they are constraining and people don't like to be constrained in that way. But AI loves it, I'm going to say. So I'm a big fan now of standards and templates because they provide the guardrails that AI needs to work on things as important as requirements. So, Since February 26, we've done, I think this is now 8 release scopes. So I've got all the data from these things. So I can now relate the software that was created or changed to the requirements that triggered them. And because this is a kind of it's not an automated process, but the handover is an automated process. So I've got data that actually very few people have now. Nowadays, because it's such a hard thing to collect. So I'm hopeful. I've got some real data that I can make some really important statements, let's say, in the future. The handover is much more important than I think you might realise, in that you can, in the handover, if you're dealing with an AI build process, you can put whatever you like in the handover to say, this is how I want your processes to work. Now, we could always do that with our existing suppliers who have humans in place and have processes and so on and so forth. But we choose not to do it. If we want to mandate the data that is collected, the metrics that are collected, and whether it's bug reports, scans from automated tools, regression test runs and statuses over time. We are paying for that data. So why don't we claim it? So I think we can do that in our handover documents. It becomes a contractual statement. So it's the requirements plus the way that that the build process operates, the data that you want to see fed back, that you can map against your requirements, the as-built data as opposed to the as-required data, and stuff like the regression test results and all that kind of other good stuff. I think there's a big deal now for enterprises who are worried about AI assurance. I think this is the opportunity to define what you want out of processes that are building software that is critical to your business. I don't see why you wouldn't do this now. Because if they're using tools, you're using tools, they just need to integrate the tools. And, if you're the customer, they have to integrate with you, not the other way around necessarily. So, more on that later. I think there's lots to say on that. I want to talk about some things that are on the roadmap. I want to move towards having requirements modeled visually. So we have a hierarchy of requirements, but also I think we need to move towards understanding what business goals and what business processes lead to those goals, and mappings between business processes and the features and the requirements that you're asking for. Now, that isn't always an easy mapping to do, but if AI does it and generates a diagram, it's much easier to review a diagram than to write that diagram. So I think we're moving in that direction. I've not specified any of this yet, but I think that's an area we need to look more carefully at. Because ReqQA runs multiple application projects for you as an organisation, it basically holds your application portfolio. Now, there's an awful lot of portfolio management kind of stuff that could be brought into bear within ReqQA. Again, I think that's probably maybe next year, but not this year. But and there are tools that do this already. So, but I think that door is open now for us. I'm very excited to think about how tools can do a lot of the static detection of problems in code itself. We don't use static analysis tools enough, and it would appear to me that many of the issues that we fear AI introduce, such as security issues into code, we have a chance of trapping those as part of the build process. If we define static analysis checks as part of the build process within our build agent, those agents can do it and give us the data back. Why don't we do that? There's an awful lot of open source tools. It's not a matter of cost necessarily. These are tools that a good software development shop should be using anyway, shouldn't they? The six categories are code quality, security, supply chain, which is your bombs, SBOM things, front end, interfaces, config process. AI exposes us to risks because we don't have visibility of the code. We need to specify that tools monitor what's going on inside our build agents. So there's a broader context to this in that if we're specifying requirements, why don't we specify the contract? Why don't we specify the acceptance process, which is usually part of a contract? But the acceptance process might be automated. And so that should be very carefully defined from our end, from the client end, to our build agents. I still think that the client is accountable for doing their own acceptance, definition of acceptance, and also the testing, and to allow them to make the decisions about acceptance. We can't rely on suppliers to do this, and I don't think it's the right thing to do to let agents take this on. Agents can implement code and they can implement developer level testing, and we can specify the degree to which we want to see that. We can do that. Why don't we do that? I do not think AI is good necessarily at acceptance because there's a human element to all human user acceptance processes. So I think for now, tools can help us to build an acceptance test and maybe to run some proportion, maybe a big proportion. But humans have to be in that loop because it's humans who have to make the decision, not tools. So vendor management and certainly contract management, I think, is another open door into which we might walk. So, who's going to build this? Well, I thought about it myself. It's become apparent to me now that if this is going to have legs, I need to establish a company whose mission is to build and implement ReqQA to make it an industrial strength product. Right now, I would say it's more than an experimental. It's more than an MVP. It's doing real work for us. But it's, we haven't got hundreds of customers yet, so we need to evolve it into that phase. Hence, a company to do this. So, I think I've said all this in the press release last week. Here's my call to action. If you want to be involved, if you want to explore the capabilities of ReqQA, please get in touch. We can set you up and give you an account, and you can have a jolly good play and have fun. I didn't say earlier, but I'll say this now. I suppose we could use our account with OpenAI or Claude, or Anthropic or whoever, but we'd expect you to use your own. You'll probably get a better deal out of these companies anyway. So you can put in your own credentials and for the tool to use your accounts. If you're a testing or a QA or a requirements engineering firm offering services, I think ReqQA offers a real opportunity to shift or to create new services. Certainly, if you have the opportunity is clear. If you have better requirements, maybe you'll get better software out of it. If you have better requirements, you can definitely build better tests. So I think it seems to me such a natural thing to say to the testing community that we should get more into requirements and use tools to improve our requirements, whether it's ReqQA or something else, it doesn't matter. If you get better requirements out of that, you will get better system level and acceptance level testing. So I think you can offer better services on that basis. And the services will be different from what you've done in the past. The third invitation is to investors. Clearly, this isn't going to fund itself. I'm looking to meet people who are interested in this area. I think it's a huge personally, I think it's a huge opportunity because there are 25 million people writing code. That is going to change dramatically to people who are overseeing AI. I don't want to talk about job loss or anything like that, but a number of those people will move into the requirements space. I think a number of testers will move into the requirements space. I think development is headed towards an AI factory kind of approach for many organizations, maybe not everybody. But that requires good requirements. And the better requirements you have, the more comprehensive, the more systematically checked requirements you have, the better the better job AI will make of it when it builds software. So with that, I thank you very much. I'm sorry this went on far too long, but I wanted to get it off my chest so you understood where I was coming from. If you do want to know more about the tool, ReqQA is up and running. That's the website for the tool, not the tool itself. If you want to access, just let me know or just fill in the form on the website, and we'll get back to you very quickly as soon as we can. Thank you very much.